Right, so now we're heading towards the business end of our language paper 2. We're now moving on to question 3. So question 3 will look like this, and it says we now only need to refer to one of the sources, source B. How does the writer use language to describe the conditions in the hospital? Now this one is worth 12 marks, so it's getting a little bit more substantial and a little bit more important to our GCSE grade now. Now this one is all about language, which is exactly the same as question 2 in paper 1. So it only wants to know about words, techniques, alliteration and sentences. Now the same as question 2 in paper 1, we are now going to, the AQA want us to consider the overall effect of the language. What is all the language working together to tell us? They want us to find rich language choices that we can then analyse in depth and detail. They want us to examine how these language choices present the hospital. But then the top students will then look at how these language choices work together and connect together to give us an overall message across the text. Now what you want to be looking at particularly when it comes to this question is the focus. This one wants to know about the conditions in the hospital. So anything else about anything else I can't talk about, I've got to leave alone, and I only want language choices to do the conditions. Now you've seen this in my previous videos for paper 1. This is a grid that my students use that shape their analysis. It's so important that your language analysis is tight, it is clear, it's not rambly and waffly and vague. If you're going to talk about figurative language, you've got to talk about the image. If you're going to talk about alliteration, you need to talk about the sounds. If you're going to talk about sentences, you need to talk about the pace of them. And if you're going to do words, you need to do the connotations. You can get a very high mark and do very well simply with those 4 banks of techniques. But if you want to talk about other ones as well, you've got some on the right hand side. I can't stress enough how important it is that you're really clear and simple in your language analysis. Clear explanation, sophisticated and clever interpretations. So the approach. It only wants to know about source B, so let's get source B up. Here it is. Okay. Now the first thing I'm going to be doing is I need to consider the overall message, the overall effect of the language. Now having read through this text, I think all the language works together to show how the conditions in the hospital are so barbaric and they're so vile, but even so, there's nurses are still working on through them. Now I've got my overall effect, it gives me a lens to find language choices. Now I'm looking for language choices that support that overall argument, that support that point of view. And I need to find at least 2, possibly 3 of them. So now I've got my 3 quotes, my 3 rich quotes that I've got lots of language points to say about, and they are all going to come back to the central argument that these conditions are barbaric and vile. So now I've got my quotes, I'm ready to start writing up. Now the first thing I need is a clear introduction. This doesn't need to be long, it only needs to be a sentence or 2. And it's just giving an overview of how the language works together to present an overall effect. Here's mine. The writer uses language to present the conditions in the hospital as barbaric and vile, but also a reason to unite together. Dead simple, dead straightforward, but it gives my whole answer and now a cohesive argument, a cohesive order, and the examiner knows that I'm not just going to find random metaphors and talk about them with a load of rubbish. I'm actually going towards a centralised argument. Now I'm ready to write up, and these are P's paragraphs, okay? So, first of all, I'm going to identify a language feature used. So Nightingale uses a hyperbole to create imagery. Next, I need some nice evidence. Here it is, whacking my evidence. Short, sweet, does the job. Now I'm coming to do my explanation. Now look how long my explanation is, but it's not long because it's waffle. It's long because I've layered up different interpretations. First of all, I've talked about the imagery and what the imagery does to show us about the conditions in the hospital. But then I'm going in straight away into what language choices create that imagery. And I've talked about the verb steeped. Because it's a word, I'm going to talk about the connotations of it, because that's what it said in my grid previously. But also because I'm a top student, I've given 2 very clear, very different interpretations of the word steeped. I'm not going to be a narrow student that just says one thing. Then, I would now zoom, but I'm going to be a little bit more sophisticated than that. And I'm now going to do my stretch, because there is a clear pattern here for me. The writer here has used we and are to indicate how despite his difficulties there's a camaraderie in the hospital, but they do that in this quote and across the text. So I'm going to make the point to the examiner that I'm looking not at language in isolation, but looking at language across the text. Then I'm going to round off my answer with a nice zoom, where I zoom in on additional language choice and then look at the connotations. So if you look across my answer, I've picked up on 4 different language choices the writer has made. So like a really glorious wedding cake, I've layered up my points of view, layered up my interpretations, examiners having an absolute party and ticking away, and they're seeing this is a student that can analyse language perceptively and with detail. So if I kept going in that vein, I'd probably need one more paragraph as good as that, or if I'm not going to do one as good as that, probably two simpler ones. The examiner is going to be giving out marks left, right and centre. I've analysed the effects of the writer's choice of language perceptively and with detail. I will have had a range of judicious quotes if I've picked up on a couple, and I've got a range of subject terminology. This is exactly what we want to be doing in question 3 to be going and getting the highest marks.